Its 30mm 7-barreled cannon is the most powerful gun ever to take to the skies. It carries enough weaponry to disable 16 battle tanks. The A-10 is a legend among the soldiers it protects on the ground. So take a flight over the battlefield with the A-10 Tankbuster, now on Modern Marvels. Throughout Operation Iraqi Freedom, the A-10 Warthog was the most well-known and feared plane in the U.S. Air Force.
I think it was the best equipped Air Force and Army ready to fight that we could have.
Its ability to work in close support with ground troops, to take out enemy positions and tanks, and to act as a spotter plane made it a linchpin in the victory over Saddam Hussein and his regime.
We're kind of like the insurance guy up there, or the 911 force. When they need help, they call, and that's who they expect to be there.
But for the vision of a handful of men, this aircraft was almost never built. In World War I, aircraft were used as a way of supporting the troops on the ground. In facing down resistance, the planes were called in to either bomb or wipe out the enemy.
Close support in cases of mobile warfare, of moving fronts, of fast-moving combat, whether it was retreat or advance, close support was overwhelmingly important. In those situations of battlefield chaos, where it's very hard to get good artillery support, suddenly airplanes become overwhelmingly important and overwhelmingly effective.
During the Second World War, fighter bombers such as the Typhoon, the Tempest, the Mustang, and the Thunderbolt I were used in close air support roles very effectively. But one single aircraft was feared as the ultimate close air support machine. The German Junkers 87 dive bomber, nicknamed the Stuka, and fitted with a screaming siren. It demonstrated the most effective use of close air support ever seen.
This was a time when the Germans were enormously outnumbered by the Russians, and yet having extraordinary successes against very heavy, huge Russian tank forces. And a key component of that were these Stukas, of which the most famous unit was led by Colonel Rudel, who was the most decorated pilot of World War II.
Colonel Hans Ulrich Rudel's unit wreaked havoc on the Russian front, with Rudel himself destroying 511 Russian tanks. But with the defeat of Germany in 1945, the success of close air support was largely overlooked. On September 18, 1947, the United States Air Force was born. Its main focus, to deliver nuclear weapons. Close air support was not a priority.
This is the extraordinary part of the whole genesis of the A-10. The Air Force, traditionally, from the beginnings of World War II on, had no interest in close support, have none today. They don't like working for the Army, that they prefer running their own war, totally independent of everybody else. A very natural bureaucratic reaction.
During the Vietnam War, the Air Force had to rely on aircraft such as the A-1 Skyraider to protect its ground forces. But what was clearly needed was an aircraft specifically designed to carry large bomb loads, absorb heavy ground fire, and fly for long periods at low altitude over the battleground. Taking the initiative, a group of highly skilled engineers at the Pentagon came up with the specifications for a close air support aircraft, with the hope that the Air Force would eventually see the light.
We designed the airplane based on the close support done by these A-1 pilots. We used the experience of the Germans on the Russian front with Stukas, and we actually interviewed Colonel Rudel, who was still alive at the time. We used his experience very heavily in the design of the airplane. And we tried to shape an airplane that was directly useful in specifically support of Army troops in the field.
A first in aviation history, the Air Force eventually initiated a competition for an aircraft to be specifically designed for close air support.
When the request for the proposal on the A-10 came in, I immediately was assigned to work on the aerodynamics of that. Fundamentally, she was to be a close air support airplane, which was capable of knocking out heavy tanks, as well as operating from an unprepared short field of 1,500 feet.
Fairchild Republic took on the challenges of designing an aircraft unlike any ever built. The winning design would be a stable, straight-winged aircraft to allow for excellent lift and maneuverability. This combined with the General Electric's TF-34 turbofan engines, which would give it a high thrust for takeoff, and a low fuel consumption to enable the plane to have loiter capabilities essential for the role. With unbeatable durability and an easy-to-repair maintenance program, these were the ideal engines designed to fly in a hostile battle zone. But for the Fairchild team, the challenges became apparent immediately.
The typical way to build a jet airplane, and the reason that all jet fighters are impossible to use in this close support mission, because they all have fuel wrapped around the engine. Once you have fuel wrapped around an engine, a .22 rifle will kill you. One of our very first design rules was the fuel had to be someplace other than the engine.
Not only was the fuel safely stored in the fuselage away from the engines, the fuel tanks also had unique built-in fire suppression capabilities. The aircraft's hydraulics could also withstand serious firepower.
We required that every hydraulic control had to be backed up by a simple mechanical cable system that's much harder to shoot out.
We could come back with hydraulic system shot out, half the tail shot off, a piece of the wing shot off. It had two engines, you could come home on one. The pilot was bathed in a titanium tub which could take 20-millimeter shells. It was really a piece of machinery that you could fly into hell and back.
The A-10's survivability was matched with a deadly capacity, a huge 30-millimeter Gatling gun. Developed specifically for the A-10, the GAU-8A Avenger was capable of firing almost 4,000 rounds a minute, giving the aircraft the ability to blow through tank armor.
Fire.
She was designed primarily with a Gatling gun in the nose, and it was built to destroy anything that was considered an armored weapon on the ground. But she was built around the gun, and the gun was a given from day one.
Fairchild Republic wins the competition to build the first aircraft in U.S. aviation history, specifically designed for close air support. But before the Air Force will give the go-ahead, they want hard evidence that the aircraft and the gun can perform well together. The need would spark a series of simulation tests unlike any ever produced. Little did its designers realize, these tests would change the future of aviation history. The A-10 has a false canopy painted on the bottom side of its fuselage. This is done to confuse the pilots of enemy planes during air-to-air combat. Modern marvels will return in a moment. After a heated competition, Fairchild Republic has produced the ultimate piece of machinery to perform the role of close air support. But the Air Force was reluctant to go into production until they have seen for themselves that the aircraft can fulfill its very specific combat role. In a series of